I can do an intro for you.
I would appreciate that. Is this live already?
They're going to turn it on. Hi, everyone. I think it is. Wow. Microphones are fun things, aren't they? Okay. Good afternoon. On behalf of Carroll County Public Library, A Likely Story Bookstore, and Carroll Lutheran Village, welcome. We want to be sure to thank our partners at A Likely Story Bookstore and our excellent hosts, the staff here at Carroll Lutheran Village. They do have refreshments in the back, and thanks in particular to Jess Andrews back there for helping us and hosting us today. We also want to give a quick shout out to our promotional partners at McDaniel College. It was a couple of months ago now that I got an email forwarded to me that a former Carroll Countyan had just written a debut novel titled The Book of Maps. And by the way, they were also an Oscar and Golden Globe winner, multiple Golden Globe winner, and had written the screenplay for On Golden Pond. Sure, well, we'll see what kind of interest there is. Well, bottom line is that you never know who your neighbors will be, right? Oh, and by the way, I will try to trim down his official bio here, but what on earth could I possibly cut out of this impressive life? Ernest Thompson lived in Westminster in the 60s, as many of you know, moving from New Hampshire when his father was hired by Western Maryland College, now McDaniel College. Known then by his first name of Richard, or as it said on his varsity letter jacket, Dick, Thompson was active in Westminster High School sports, graduating in 1967, and I know we have a lot of Westminster High School alumni here, so give yourselves a cheer. But he's never forgotten his Westminster roots. In the name of his father, Theron Barker Thompson, he started a scholarship available to Carroll County students interested in pursuing their own studies in the arts. 40 years ago, Thompson was awarded an honorary Doctor of Letters by Western Maryland College, which again is now McDaniel, and with a second certificate commemorating the recognition when the school was then renamed McDaniel. That's two. 1, 2, keeping track at home. Ernest Thompson won a Writers Guild Award and a Broadway Drama Guild Award for Best Play. His work has been nominated for a Tony, an Emmy, and a British Academy Award. His more than 35 plays have been seen in theaters around the world. The most enduring, On Golden Pond, has been translated into 30 languages. Arabic, the newest, and played in more than 40 countries on 6 continents, including 3 runs on Broadway. I have only been to Broadway 2 times to see something, but that's okay. That's a lot. His films include On Golden Pond, starring, of course, Katharine Hepburn, Henry Fonda, and Jane Fonda, Sweetheart's Dance, featuring Susan Sarandon and Jeff Daniels, The Lies Boys Tell by Kirk Douglas, 1969, with Robert Downey Jr. and Bruce Dern, The West Side Waltz, starring Shirley MacLaine and Liza Minnelli, Out of Time, and the live On Golden Pond, which featured Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer. Those are a lot of names. The last 4 of which Ernest also directed as he has his latest films, Time and Charges and Heavenly Angle. Both were produced by his company, Whitebridge Farm Productions, and offered as on-location training to anyone of any background, experience, or age interested in any aspect of filmmaking, a truly remarkable thing. In the theater, Ernest has directed numerous world premieres and has acted himself with the likes of Cyril Richard, Maureen O'Sullivan, Alexis Smith, Julie Hagerty, Jean Stapleton, Charlotte Ray, Susan Sarandon, and many other notables. From his home base, a 200-year-old farm in rural New Hampshire, Ernest has worked with hundreds of writers, hosting his internationally renowned Write on Golden Pond workshops, and through Rescind Recidivism, the prison writing program he established with his wife, and also fellow writer, Karen Thompson, who's with us today too. Hi, Karen. Giving inmates a chance to feel creative as well as human, capable, and worthy. Ernest also has had the privilege of providing one-on-one script and manuscript analysis and private coaching to actors and public speakers. A prolific songwriter, Ernest has worked with legendary composers and singers, producing songs he's used in his films and plays and posted on YouTube and elsewhere. He'll soon direct his long-awaited film sequel, Home on Golden Pond, and his timely, provocative, and hilarious indie, Parallel America, in which he'll co-star with New Hampshire's Emmy-winning Gordon Clapp. In late 2023, his novel Outclaws will be released by Global Collective Publishers. Please join me in welcoming back Ernest Thompson.
I sound like such an interesting person. I'd like to get to know me. First of all, thanks for coming out today. My publisher was amazed when I told him we were going to have 100 or something people, and I said, yeah, but I know them all. So, and they still like me enough to come out, so I think that's probably a good sign. It's been trippy to be back in the old hometown. I'm going to try to adjust this a tiny bit if I can. I should know how. I've worked in this business before. Yesterday, my wife and I went by my family's old home on West Green Street, and we were thrilled to see that someone has bought it and cleaned it up and made it pretty, because like all of you, I'm sure, everything, when you live in a town like this, there's such a balance of joyful memories and sad ones. And my father took ill and was dying in that house. So when I walk in the door, that's what I feel most, is his ghost. But I know how pleased he would be that the house is looking good, and that he never knew, of course, about the scholarship that I started for him, but I know that would please him too. And it pleases me that every semester I get a letter from some student from Carroll County thanking me for making it possible. It's not a full scholarship, but it helps pay the ridiculously expensive tuitions that all colleges have. And each time I read one of those letters, I thank my dad just for making my life possible, for bringing me to Westminster in the first place. So it's been a treat to see some of you, or see half of your faces today. You can tell me anything, I believe you, that we knew each other, because until you take your mask down, I probably won't know. But my dear friend Diana, many of you had her mom, Martha, as a teacher. She sent me a photo from a class reunion that Mike was there, and Mike was there, and Ruth Ann, I think, and Sue. But had I not had a little rubric at the bottom telling me who everybody was, there's a chance I may not have known everybody, which is amazing to me because I haven't changed at all. But I am someone who stays in touch with people. One of my best friends I met in kindergarten, and we've never not been in touch with each other. And I have friends from every year of my life, and I think it's important, and for a storyteller it's essential, because I can trace my life through my stories and vice versa. And in this book, called the Book of Maps, if you don't know that, people ask me if it's autobiographical. 20 years ago, in the summer of 2002, I took a road trip with my young son, who was then 10, and we drove from Los Angeles to New Hampshire. And we had a few adventures along the way, none as perilous or as exciting or as scary or dramatic as the characters in the book, but that's the license of being a storyteller. Before I get any farther into this, I want to introduce my friend. Need I say more? I never leave home without it. Actually, when we went by 69 West Green Street yesterday, at noontime, the guy who lives there now, he saw us through his Ring doorbell, so of course he didn't come to the door. And when we were going back to our car, he said, "May I help you?" And I said, "Well, I hope so. I used to live here." And he said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah." And I walked across the street, and I said, "My name's Ernest Thompson." He said, "Oh my God, you used to live here." And I said, that is true. And he's like a techie guy, so he was working upstairs in what used to be my baby sister's bedroom. And I said, we don't want to intrude, so just thanks for letting us see the house. And he said, no, come in. And then he said, but you can't stay. And I said, that's great. And he said, because I want my wife to be here. And she's a dog groomer, and she works right up the street. And so we waited while he called her, and he said, you're not going to believe who's standing in our living room. I was thinking, I hope that's good news to her. So we went back when dog grooming session was over, and they gave us a tour of the house. But I said, and they wanted me to sign, they had copies of On Golden Pond, which I signed for them, and they also wanted to take pictures, which is great. And I said, well, since I'm here, we want to take this? And I thought their teeth were going to fall out. And I've had that experience for 40 years now. And when I won the what do you call this thing, Oscar, because first I'd won a Golden Globe, and I thought the odds of that were ridiculous. So by the time I got nominated for an Oscar, I thought maybe there's an outside chance that I could win. How do I look? But it turns out that this is the 95th year of the Academy Awards, so that means that only 95 people have won my award in the last 95 years. So I love being part of that select fraternity. And a few years ago, Karen and I were flying out to LA, and I had the Oscar in my backpack. And so I put it into X-ray, and it started down the conveyor belt, and then it got inside that thing, and it stopped. And the guy was looking at it, and then he called someone else over, and he called someone else. And there were like 9 people looking at the thing because the profile is very identifiable. And so finally, they had enough looking at it, and they sent it out, and they assigned a young Asian woman to check it out. But she was so discreet that she didn't take it out of my backpack. She just turned it so that she could read what it said. She said, "That's you?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Very nice." So somehow the Academy Award has become like royalty in our country. And I'm, of course, grateful to have won one. And it's really sort of defined my life, because for the rest of time, I'm Ernest, Academy Award-winning author of On Golden Pond, Ernest Thompson. It could be worse. Could have been Porky's or Murder on Elm Street 14 or something like that. I've written lots of other stuff, as Lisa so graciously rattled off to you, and I am proud of all of them. And people will say to me sometimes, do you ever feel pressure that you're never going to be able to replicate what you did the first time? I say, no, I never feel any pressure at all. What I feel is relief, because I got it over with. And I remember the night of the Oscars 40 years ago. I forgot to eat before I went, and if any of you know me very well, you know I don't do well without being fueled. And so I wandered out into the hallway, and there was Warren Beatty, who was nominated and also won that night for directing Reds. And we'd met before, and I said, "You got anything to eat?" And he had like Tums or some kind of mints, and which is the worst thing to give someone with a sugar imbalance. So I was pretty schizoid by the time my award came around. And some of you may know this, and I'm not dropping names, but my date that night was Diana Ross. And if you ever watch my acceptance speech again, you can find it online, or you can go to my website. You'll see her lipstick on my cheek. Yeah. But we don't talk about that. But I didn't know. I didn't know that night that how much it was going to change my life. If that's for me, I'm not taking any calls, by the way. Okay. But it's made it possible for me to get other projects produced. It's made it possible, at least for me, to get meetings. It's made it possible for me to set up bookstore events. And so I'm grateful for it. But it's also 40 years ago. And as Lisa mentioned, I am working on a sequel slightly overdue called Home on Golden Pond. Because what we quickly realized was that if we were going to do a sequel, it didn't matter what it was called as long as it had those 3 words in it: on, golden, and pond. So we could call it Murder on Golden Pond, and it would still we probably could still set it up. So we're still working on that. We have the script out to some stars. We're still putting our financing together, which is how I live a lot of my life. In 2020, I had a movie that was about to go that she mentioned called Parallel America. And I had 2 plays that I was pushing towards production, and the pandemic hit. And I don't know about you, but Karen and I were kind of okay with sequestering, because it turned out it's not that really different from our normal lives. We're really good at not seeing people, and we live on a farm in the middle of nowhere, and we were happy to close the gate and go to work. But because I come from a New England work ethic, I'm not good at not working. So I wrote a book. And Karen started writing hers, which is a beautiful memoir, which I hope will come out next year. And then, as Lisa mentioned, I have another book coming out probably in the spring of 2024 now. So switching lanes has been an extraordinary experience for me, because if I do a play, and as she mentioned, I've done 35 of different lengths, or I do a movie, I know how the audience is going to respond. I'm either on the stage or I'm standing in the back of the theater listening and watching. I can hear the laughter, and I can hear see the heads nodding, or I can feel the silence when the moment gets dramatic. But with a book, I don't know. I don't know how you're reading my book. You could be sitting on the toilet for all I know. And I don't care, as long as, A, you paid for it, and B, you read it. But it's been the most amazing 3 months now since the book came out. Karen and I have done bookstore appearances and theater appearances all over the country, West Coast and East. And I've really enjoyed the personal connection with people who either have read the book or are reading the book. I want to read a little bit from the book, but it won't make as much sense to you until after you've read it. But would you like to hear a little bit? Okay. I'd like to start with what I consider to be the best writing in the book. It's called The Copyright Page. I didn't write it, but it's published by Global Collective Publishers, blah, 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 Ernest Thompson, 2022. This is a work of fiction, and all characters described in this book are the product of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is entirely coincidental. Because here's the deal. I don't know how to write fiction without stealing from real-life people. And some of you probably remember my mother. Who had my mother as an English or French teacher in the 9th grade? Also known as the worst experience of my life. My mother was a teacher by trade. That's how she met my father when he was a principal of a little tiny school up in Shapley, Maine. And he hired her to be the Latin teacher. And he was 7 years older than she, so he was maybe 29, and probably 27, and she was 20. And he would give her a ride back down to Marlborough, Massachusetts, was 4 or 5 hours, and he would charge her $1 each way. And that's how their love story began. But when my last sibling, my baby sister Bettina, had gone off to school, my mother couldn't stand sitting still, so she got her teacher's degree from Western Maryland and wanted to go back to work. And she tutored for a while. She tutored at, what's the hospital in Sykesville? Springfield, yeah. And that was great, because one time I went to pick her up, and if you know Springfield, it's for people who are challenged. And so she would tutor people there, and I went, and there was a guy who came up to me and he said, we're one man short on our basketball team. Do you want to play? And I said, I don't think I qualify. He said, oh, yeah, you do. But then my mother was offered a job because Miss whom did she replace in 9th grade? Cole. Miss Cole. Miss Cole here? Yeah. So was it you my mother replaced? As French and English? You're the one. Was it because you were going to have a baby? No, but did you have to leave because you were pregnant? Well, or a nightmare. My mother said, how would you feel about my teaching French and English, taking over Mrs. Cole? And I said, how would you feel if I go hang myself in the garage? I was 14. It was the most self-conscious, paralytic moment of my life. And I'll never forget. Where's Miss Wentz? We built up to that day when Mrs. Cole couldn't stand anymore because she was so preggy. And it was the day my mother was going to begin teaching. And so she taught. Mike, did you have her for English? Yeah, ninth grade. Yeah. And the rest of us had her for French. I said, what are you going to wear? And she said, I'm wearing this. And I said, no, you can't wear that. That's ridiculous. And so I made her change outfits about 4 times. And I forget what period we were. Diana, I think you were in my class, waiting for that moment when my mother would walk in. And my back went out, my stomach hurt. And she was a lovely woman, but she shouldn't have been teaching her 14-year-old son French. And I remember she walked in and she said, bonjour, ma classe. I sat in the very back. I couldn't have gotten any lower in my seat. But my homeroom teacher was Miss Sissel. Anybody remember Miss Sissel? You remember her? Oh, she did. I wish I'd known that. I was apparently misbehaving. Hard to imagine of me, I know. But Miss Sissel said, come up to the desk. And this was in like the end of the day, homeroom. And she said, you have to have this signed by your parents that you were misbehaving in class. I said, okay. And so she gave me this little slip. And I said, I'll bring it back tomorrow. She said, no, you can bring it back right now. You can go right down the hall to Mrs. Cole's class, and you can have her sign it. So it was a slip of paper, like a memo thing. And I went down the hall, and I put it face down on my mother's desk. And I said, one of the kids in my class wants an autograph. She signed it. I took it back to Miss Sissel. I said, look, I got her signature. End of story. On Golden Pond, the character of the old lady, I like to say old lady, even though she's younger than I am now, was named Ethel. And to those of you how many people have ever seen the movie of On Golden Pond? Let me ask the question a different way. How many people have not seen the movie of On Golden Pond? Nobody? I'm so impressed by your taste in literature and film. In New Hampshire, it's required viewing because that's where the movie was shot. But I'm so grateful and pleased that you've all seen it. Ethel, played by Katharine Hepburn in the movie, played by Julie Andrews when I directed live television, played by Franny Sternhagen on Broadway. My mother thought it was about her. And because it's a pretty wonderful character, so my mother decided that was her. So after my dad had died, she came out to California, and I took her to a hoity-toity Hollywood kind of party. And I went around introducing her to famous people I pretended to know. And I took her up to Robert Redford, and I said, hey, Bob, pretend you know me. I want to introduce you to my mom, Mrs. Esther Thompson. And my mother said, I'm Ethel. And my friend Bob said, I hope you find a nice place for your mom. The reason I point to the copyright page is because I feel as a writer, and be forewarned, that I can steal from everybody. And I love that everybody I meet is a character. And when I teach these workshops that Lisa mentioned called Write on Golden Pond, cleverly enough, writers come literally from all over the country. And I'll say to them, if you can't think of characters or plots, go home. And I don't mean that in an insulting way. It means that every family is full of them. And those of you I know Mike Sharon very well. He and his brother Steve were my besties all through junior high and high school. I knew his dad. That was a character. I knew his mom, too. She was a little Mary Sunshine. But his dad was sometimes mean or brisk. And Mike loves it when I tell this story. But when I had been nominated for an Oscar, and I'd come back to Westminster because they were dedicating a new theater, I think, in the old library or something. I can't remember what the details were. And Lou Sharon came up to me and said, "You lucky son of a bitch." That was Lou. I said, "Yeah, thanks. No work went into it whatsoever." But I know Diana's family. I know her brothers. I knew her brothers, and I knew her mom and her dad, the horse guy. And I know what a character Martha Rupert was. We all did. She was such an inspiration to me. And she was the first teacher I ever had who challenged me, who said, "By the way, you're faking it. You're just walking through. So if you want to do something, if you want to make a contribution, not only to the world, but to yourself, get it together." And that scared me. And then I had Mr. Eaton. How many had Mr. Eaton as an English teacher? On the acknowledgments page of my book, I'm going to read that to you because I read the first page. I will read the next to the last page. I acknowledged, my agent, because she said I had to, and the publisher. And then it says, "And to the spirit of Mr. Eaton, who changed decades of students' lives at Westminster High School in Maryland, and gave this one an A in creative writing, and asked, after reading one masterwork, if I dropped acid." I hadn't. And served as my one-man research team well into his 80s. And that was true. He had such an effect on me. And I don't know if I'd be standing here if it hadn't been for Mr. Eaton, because he taught us about theater, taught us about Shakespeare. And yes, we had to memorize the Charge of Light Brigade and stuff like that. But he would go off every summer, as some of you may recall. He would go to Paris, and he'd go to Egypt, and then he would go to London and see plays, and then he'd go to Broadway and see plays, and he'd come back and talk about those plays. And it just was so eye-opening for me that, wow, there's really a world outside there. And I always thought about Plato's allegory of the cave, that he was going out and bringing light into my life, into my cave. And so I will be forever grateful. And when I say that he did research for me, it was the greatest, because I think he lived to about 86 or 7, and right up to the end of his life. How old was he? About 86, 87, yeah. Because he died in 96, I think, or 95. I was in the middle of making a movie, and I came back to see him for the last time. But I would call him up, and I'd say, "Mike, I need a biblical quote." So far, lightning hasn't struck, so that's probably a good thing. Maybe something from the Old Testament that talks about enlightenment. He said, "Give me a few days, and I'll get back to you." And he always would say, if he answered the phone, "Eaton here," right? And so I would always say, "Thompson here." And we kept this act going all the way to the end of his life. And I remember vividly, because he moved over to West Green Street, not too far from where my house had been, and going to visit him there. And, he unfortunately didn't have a great end, because he had gotten prostate cancer, I think, and he was going down. But even then, that sharpness in his eyes was still there, and we still had laughs. And so I'm forever grateful to him. I'm going to read the prologue to the book. And then I don't know if you have any questions you'd like to ask me, but I'm really good at answering them. I've done now, I think, 75 radio, television, newspaper interviews for this book. And so I know all the answers, and what I don't, I just make up. The Book of Maps by me. This is the prologue. Before I get to that page, I want to say this book is dedicated. Anybody started reading the book? Anybody own it and started reading it yet? Marilyn has. Connie has. Okay, you get extra credit. Please report to Miss Wentz, and she will give you a star. It starts for two of my favorite writers. This is the dedication page. August, the best traveling companion a man could ever have. That's my son, August. Haven't heard from him yet, whether he's read the book. If he has issues with it, I'm going to direct him to the copyright page. And Karen, my lodestar, my homeward angel, my destiny. That got me some loving, I'll tell you. Prologue. America one summer belonged to fat and slim chance. It was conquered by the not-so-great escape artists and claimed for the crown by Sir Lunchalot, and Moron the magician. The names would blur the winking inventions of two wise guys punishing wittiness, passably amusing to themselves, if to no one else, and frequently forgotten as soon as the handles had been adopted, depending on the hour of the day that the bandit wagon crossed the next state line and parked by the welcome sign, and new identities were chosen and mugshots taken, flies unzipped, surreptitious middle fingers raised, eyeballs buggy in feigned drunkenness and road-weary delirium. The license of the getaway driver, a small-town crime reporter could easily ferret out, was assigned to one Brendan Ball Tibbet, born November 6, 1949, making him 52 the summer of the crossing. His accomplice, his Woodley, New Hampshire birth certificate would reveal, was also Tibbet, Brenlin Allen. Brenlin, an amalgam of his father's name and his mother's, Lindsay, not a kind gift to saddle a child with, condemning him to a lifetime of correcting the spelling for the understandably perplexed. Blink, Brendan's moniker for the boy, not a fan of the poor kid's portmanteau, didn't want to take the trip. That was made clear the afternoon after school when Brendan opened the book of maps he'd bought at a yard sale and introduced the notion. The frontispiece unfolded like a concertina, crinkled on the edges, the reds and blues of its highways blanched, the Rockies a dungy brown, the Mississippi and the Ohio and other mythical rivers, the Great Lakes and the Great Salt Lake and Lake Tahoe and other majestic bodies of water, pale and translucent. But all of contiguous America filled the kitchen table from sea to shiny sea. There was no state of Alaska when the book had been published, and no Hawaii. That's us, Brendan said, a finger on the Pacific coast. And that's where we're going. He traced a jagged path from L.A. to New Hampshire. That's a long way, the kid said. Yeah, must have sucked for the settlers in their Conestoga wagons, huh? And they didn't even have McDonald's. Monitoring the boy's scornful expression, trying to calibrate its severity. Come on, we'll have a blast. And you'll see the country, you'll see sights none of your friends ever has. And we'll camp out, and we'll hike, and go skinny dipping, and drink beer, and go to cat houses, and rob banks. Who wouldn't want to drive across America with his dad? Blink raised his hand. Sounds boring, does it? Well, all of life is boring unless you fill it with things that aren't, and that, who knows, you might love. Letting that sink in, gauging the impact it had. And anyway, you don't have a choice. I outrank you. It wasn't as simple as that, and everyone knew it. The neighbors surely did. They'd heard the midnight ruckuses, the slammed doors and screeching tires. The movers arriving with two trucks, one voluminous, one a minivan, wouldn't have to be told why they'd been hired. How many marriages had they packed up the remains of and hauled in opposite directions? It wasn't a fairy tale, a boy and his dad about to set out on the adventure of their lives. What it was, the father knew, and the boy didn't want to, but may have suspected if he dared connect the clues, was an unspoken eulogy. A swan song to a family in the final stages of disrepair. We'll leave the week that school gets out. You can help me plan the route, Brendan said. He tapped the book of maps as if all the secrets of the continent lay within its tattered covers. Ineffable possibilities, neglected back roads, and heart-stirring passes over the Rockies, traversing the Great Plains, through cities and towns, and the immense landmass of forests and deserts, as if it could lead them somewhere mystical and healing. Yeah, I don't think so, Brendan said, and left the kitchen, his father staying at the table, carefully turning the brittle pages of the book of maps, one by one, state by state. Miss Wentz and Mrs. Cole will be very happy to know that there's a lot of language in this. I told Miss Wentz there's some French with translations. I have recklessly availed myself to book groups. I'm saying that anybody who wants to invite me to a book group, if your group wants to read the book and discuss it, you can Zoom me in. I can't stay for dinner, but I'll stop by for a drink. I've done one. And the ladies at the book group, it seems as though it's almost always ladies. Some of them really loved the book. Some hadn't read the book. And some were kind of halfway through the book. And I finally got one to say, we had a little problem with the language. I thought, oh, shh. I said, let me ask you a question. Is that because of the 4-letter words or the $10 words? It turned out it was the $10 words. It turns out when you read the book of maps, you have to work. You have to look up words sometimes. Mrs. Cole won't, but other people will. Because here's my deal. I think that as a writer, I form a compact with you as the readers or the audience. I've done my job, and now I want you to do yours. Near the end of the book, the boy says that whenever he sees a movie or reads a book, his father will say, "What did you learn?" And the kid thinks, "Oh, yikes, I was supposed to learn something." And not just that you shouldn't get kidnapped by pirates and taken to Treasure Island. The father says, "No, what did you learn? What did you, Brendan Allen Tibbet, learn?" And that was a question that got asked of me when I was a kid by my teacher father, the college professor. What did you learn? So if you read the book of maps, and I surely hope you will, you've already paid for it, you might as well, you may have to get the dictionary out sometimes. And if that's true, then I'll think, okay, I did my job. And what if you add a word to your vocabulary? What if you expand your horizon a tiny bit, the way my father taught me to, and Mr. Eaton reinforced, and Martha reinforced, and all of my teachers? I need to go back to the acknowledgments page because I want to get extra credit from Miss Wentz and Mrs. Cole. After the bit about Mr. Eaton, it says, "And to all teachers, like my parents, dedicating their own creativity and hard-fought wisdom to turning lights on in the darkness of their sometimes confused or yearning or lost young dreamers." So thank you, my teachers, but thank you, my readers, for going on the journey with me. Sometimes when I sign the book, I'll say, "May the book of maps take you where you need to go." And that's a line from the book also, because the guy buys the book, as it said in the prologue, at a garage sale, and he's so taken with it. But we find out in the epilogue that the marriage was on the rocks, and he would drive by his house, and if his wife's car was there, he had two choices. He could either go in. I know I'm seeing some divorced people out here, right? So perhaps you can relate to this. But if he went in, they would continue an argument that they left unfinished yesterday or 3 weeks ago. His other choice was to drive on by. And in the book, he drives on by. And he goes over to the playground where his little boy is playing handball or basketball with his buddies. And he thinks, maybe we can play. And he says, "Oh, no, I get it. He's got his own pals now." So then he thinks, I could pull into the alley behind the house. Because in Santa Monica, like Westminster, the only two places I've ever known where this is true, there's an alley behind every street. And I was showing Karen yesterday. She said, "Why are there alleys everywhere?" And I said, "I have no idea. I wasn't part of the planning commission, but it was always a great place to shoot baskets." So he thinks, I can park behind the house and I can sneak in and I can go to my little bungalow where I write. But then he sees a sign, and it's a sign for a yard sale. And that's how much he doesn't want to go home. He'll even go to a yard sale. So he goes to the yard sale, and he loves books. He just loves the music of books, as is true of me. And so there's a whole stack of books of Jackie Collins and Jacqueline Suzanne and Michael Crichton and people like that, none of which appeal to him. But then way at the bottom of this stack of books is this gigantic tome, and it's called The Book of Maps. And it was a book published in 1937, and it just calls to him. It's the siren song of freedom, and he has to buy that book. And that became the guide. And people always ask, where do titles come from? And I've told this story, but when I wrote on Golden Pond, people would say, "What's with the on? Why isn't it just Golden Pond or the Golden Pond?" And I said, well, that's because when you spend time on a lake in New England, you're on the lake. So it was on Golden Pond. Well, I finally convinced enough people that we went ahead with the play. The play opened on Broadway, and I don't know if you know this story, but it's a crazy one, and I always tell other writers because it's reassuring. The play opened during a newspaper strike, and that meant that the New York Times and the other papers did not have an opportunity to express their true feelings about my play. Otherwise, I may not be standing here today. The play opened. It became a hit. Broadway producers came to see it in this little off-Broadway theater. We went on the road. We played in Wilmington. We played at Kennedy Center. It was a smash. And we went back to Broadway, and the strike was over. And then the New York Times and the other publications had an opportunity to express their true feelings about my play, which weren't that rosy. But by then it was too late because the play had momentum. And it limped along for another few months, and then it came back to Broadway the following year, the only time that's ever happened, same cast. And it's been back a third time with an all-black cast, maybe 10, 12, 15 years ago with James Earl Jones and Leslie Uggams. And by then, by the time the strike was over, then the play was opening in Johannesburg, South Africa, and it was opening in Helsinki. And it's been this magical ride that I've been on. So all that said, we didn't get the great reviews, and we weren't doing great business. And one of the producers was an actress named Greer Garson. Who's old enough to remember Greer Garson? I love this crowd. I spoke at a high school yesterday, at Westminster High School, and I said, Katharine Hepburn. Okay, Jack Lemmon did a play of mine. Kirk Douglas? Jane Fonda? It was only when I got to Robert Downey Jr. they said, oh yeah, Iron Man. But even he's like an old guy to them, so I understand that. But Greer was one of the producers, and I think she kind of had maybe a fantasy that she would get to be in the movie. And she called me and she said, Ernest, darling, I've been thinking about the play, and I think the title is a problem, so we need to change the title. I said, well, it already opened, and the signs all say on Golden Pond. She said, it doesn't matter, because I've thought of a few alternatives, and I'd like to share them with you. And she said, how about May, December? How about Love in Autumn? And I'm thinking, how about I throw up? And then she said, and here's my favorite, A Boy for Rent. I said, that may attract an audience, but I'm not sure it's the ideal audience for us. So I didn't know what the name of this book was going to be when I started writing. I just knew I had to tell this story. I've been thinking about it for 20 years, and it's really interesting thinking that in 2002, when the story takes place, that's ancient history now. It's like a period piece that I've written. And even though we were in the shadow of 9/11 and bad stuff was happening everywhere, it was innocent compared to where we are now. There was still hope. People could still communicate with one another. People weren't at one another's throats all the time. So it's almost nostalgic for me to have written this story. And I wanted it to have maps in the title, so I went through about 1,000 possibilities. And people love using the word maps in titles, and I think that's great. I just wish they hadn't before I needed one. And then I came upon the Book of Maps, and I thought, that's a pretty cool title. And I Googled it and researched it, and nobody had used that title, remarkably enough. So that's where not only the title came from, but that's where the original 1937 travel guide called the Book of Maps came from. And I don't know what I would have done without it. So I've blabbered enough. If you have questions for me, I'll be happy to answer them. I'm going to be signing more books. If you would like to take a picture with my little friend, he's not camera shy at all. You'll discover that it's very tarnished, because I lend this statue out to charity groups. And literally thousands of people have held this Oscar and made their fantasy speeches. I want to thank my mom and dad. It would cost $2,000 to get it redipped, so I'm not doing that right away. But I like that it has all of that character to it. So do we have time to take a few questions?
We do. I was just going to snag the mic to take around.
Oh, sure. Good idea. But if you want to take a picture and you haven't bought the book, you can take a picture for $29.99 and you get a free book. So anybody have a question? Yes, sir.
You could say yes or no, or I have no idea.
Okay, I'll say all three.
Right after the movie came out on Golden Pond, Jane Fonda was interviewed, and they asked her, did your relationship with your father get better because you were in the film? And no, he gave no sign that we should be closer. But at the end of the movie, he hugs her. And it could be perfunctory, but it isn't. He had long arms, and he wrapped them all
Yeah.
around her. And I thought, is it possible that she missed it? That he was trying to tell her something that he couldn't say? I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy.
Yes, no, or I don't know. First of all, that's in the script, the hug. So maybe it's a little bit of wishful fantasy on my part. But I don't know if you know anything about Jane. We've been sort of friends for the last 42 years. And if you read her autobiography, you would know what a complicated life she's had. And when she was 10 or 11, her father was starring on Broadway in Mr. Roberts, and he moved them from L.A. back to Connecticut. And he never came home because by then he had a new squeeze in his life, and his wife, Jane, and Peter's mother, was starting to drift away. And they put her into an institution. And she came to visit one day, and Jane refused to come downstairs from her bedroom because she was angry at her mom and at her dad. And the mother, unbeknownst to everybody else, went up to the bathroom and got a razor blade and tucked it in her waistband and went back to the institution and slit her throat. And Jane was at school, and the principal came and said, "You need to go home right now." But she didn't go home. She went and rode her horse instead because she sensed that something wasn't going to be good when she got there. And her father said, "Yeah, we've lost your mom. She had a heart attack." And it was only a few days later that a kid came up to her on the playground and said, "It wasn't a heart attack. I saw it in the National Enquirer. She slit her throat." So when you carry that through your life, that lack of trust, that lack of comfort and affection, it's hard to get over that. But the scene you're talking about, if you can think, have you seen the movie anytime recently? I encourage you to. It's a really good movie. It's worth seeing again. Oh, good. Great. DVD or VHS? Okay, great. You still have a DVD player? I'm impressed. There's a moment where, and this is true in the play too, where she has to go to him. He's come back from fishing. They've just caught the trout, Walter, and they've let it go. And Jane wades out to where he's in the boat. And Mrs. Cole, I'm sorry to tell you this, but she says to him, "I think it's time for us to have the kind of relationship we're supposed to have." This wasn't in the original off-Broadway version. I added it when we moved to Broadway because I knew there was a scene missing. So she says that. And he says, "What kind of relationship are we supposed to have?" And she says, "Like a father and daughter." And he says, "Oh, just in the nick of time, huh? Worried about the will, are you? I'm leaving everything to you except what I'm taking with me." And she said, "No, you and me have been mad at each other for too long." I said to the director when I watched that evening's film, I don't think the daughter of an Ivy League college professor of English would say, "You and me have been mad at each other for too long." The director said, "Between you and I, no one will ever know." And if you don't know what's wrong with those two sentences, please report to Mrs. Cole's classroom, and she will explain it to you. But in that moment, just after that, she says something to him, and if you look closely, you see her put her hand on his arm. That's as close to affection as the Fonda family ever got. And you'll see him go under his glasses and wipe his eye because he was stunned that had happened. She had crossed the line. But other than that, I think Jane was right. I don't think they really made a lot of progress, unfortunately. Any other questions? Yes.
Did you write on Golden Pond here in Westminster or where? How did it, don't tell me a desk, but at any rate, how did it become known? How did you get it? How did somebody discover it?
Okay, I'm going to answer your 9 questions as follows. I did not write in Westminster. I left Westminster when I left high school. But I did amuse the owners of my old family house by saying that I did write my first play at 69 West Green Street because Reverend Bartholomew at my church asked me if I would write a Christmas play. And I said, you must be kidding. Me to write a Christmas play. But I did. And I still have it somewhere. And I thought, wow, I can write something. So that was pretty cool. But I wanted to say, because Miss Wentz is here, that the only time I liked high school was when I got to be creative. And I'm sure none of you would have noticed this, but the only time I liked it, the only time I paid attention was when we had creative writing. So when Mr. Eaton would ask us to write something and ask me if I was on acid, that's because I was just flying high. And I remember in French class, sometimes we would write essays in French. And I just loved that because I got to use that part of my brain that wasn't being challenged any other time. Bless Mrs. Buffington's heart and Mr. Science teacher over here. And I didn't do well in those classes because I apparently was born with no left brain whatsoever. But you put me over on my right side, and I'm golden. And I don't know if you remember this, Miss Wentz, but Mike Billingsley and I, we volunteered to do a thing, a panorama, which you pasted all the way around the classroom, and we did the history of France in carbuncle characters from Mad Magazine. Do you remember that? Do you remember that? We could both sort of draw those big-faced carbuncle characters, and again, there goes my brain. It's on fire. So thank you for that. I wrote on Golden Pond, to answer your question, in Santa Monica, logical place to write a play about a lake in Maine. Although if you ask them in Maine, they'll say I wrote it in the cottage that my family had since 1908. But no, I wrote it in Santa Monica. I had written 3 one-act plays before that, and that was a real leap of faith on my part. And I gave them to a very famous playwright who'd had a couple of plays on Broadway named James Prideaux, whom I happened to know just sort of socially. And I said, would you mind reading these? And he did, and he called back, and to my amazement, he said, these are pretty good. I'm going to give them to George Schaefer, who was a famous television director who had directed me in a movie called F. Scott Fitzgerald and the Last of the Bells. And next thing I know, George Schaefer's calling me and said, yeah, I want to take your plays under option. I said, what does that mean? He said, I'm going to pay you $200 a month to have the rights to them. I thought, $200 a month? I've succeeded. That's all I needed. And but it was hard to get one-act plays produced. So I did a television pilot from Mary Tyler Moore's company, and it was called Going Home Again, I think. And there was a director named Norman Lloyd, and Norman died only maybe 2 years ago at 106. He was the oldest living professional actor, and he was just the meanest guy I ever knew. He was on St. Elsewhere, if you know that TV show. And but his name was Norman Lloyd. And he threw the writer off the set, and I thought, I'm never going to be a writer, if that's how writers are treated. So I took his name, and I grafted it onto the character on Golden Pond, out of revenge mostly, because I wanted to make my Norman a way cooler, classier, more sophisticated guy than that Norman. So they couldn't get the 3 plays produced, and I was in New York, and I met my agent for the first time. We'd only communicated by mail and by telephone. And he said, have you ever thought about writing a full-length play? And I said, matter of fact. And out of my backpack, I took On Golden Pond. And he just so happened to have had a play done the previous year at a tiny off-Broadway theater, and they needed a play to open their new season. And he walked it across Central Park and gave it to them. I was driving across the country with my then girlfriend, and we got as far as Colorado, and we stopped at a payphone so she could call back to L.A. where her kids were. And the housekeeper, or whatever she was, said, there's this crazy guy in New York. He keeps calling for Ernest. You got to call him. It's an emergency. So I called him up, and he said, you're not going to believe it. They want to do your play. They want to open the new season. So I'm the exception that proves the rule, and I'm well aware of that because I know how hard it is to get anything produced. I wrote the play over Memorial Day weekend in 1978, and by Labor Day weekend, we were in rehearsal. And by February 28th, we were on Broadway. So that's how that happened. It's not a very satisfying answer, but that's the way it went down. Any other questions? I have a question for you. Why don't you have questions? Over here.
Do you have a favorite time of day to write?
Yes.
What is it?
All day. I write all the time. I don't know how not to write. There's no cure for it as far as I know. So I don't necessarily sit at a desk. I knew Tennessee Williams near the end of his life. His play followed mine at this little off-Broadway theater. And he would chain himself to the desk from 5 till 9 every morning. And then he would have breakfast, and then he would go back to bed. Hemingway said you're supposed to write 500 words a day. George Bernard Shaw said 1,000. If I write 10, sometimes that's enough. If I write 10,000, that's a good day. But I never restrict myself. I never like to think of it as a job, because that would feel like work, and I don't like working. But I love the playing. I love the freedom of writing stories. And sometimes, as Lisa said, I write songs as well as plays, movies, and novels. And I can write them in my head. So there are songs that I've done. The one I did with Carly Simon called the Father-Daughter Dance, I call it the Blue Trail song, because I wrote it while I was carving this new trail in my woods. And you know, you think, oh, what's the next rhyme? Next rhyme going to be, okay, got it. And then you go to the next tree and cut off branches. So that's how I live my life. It's a little psychotic because, and my kids grew up listening to me talk to myself up on the third floor. And my wife, fortunately, is another writer, so she understands. But every day I write something. And it may not be with a pencil or a computer, but today, for instance, I have a new song that I'm doing with this guy I just met in L.A., and it needed a bridge. So the last couple of days, I don't know if Karen even knows this, I've been singing the bridge in my head. I've been putting those words together, and I'll send it to him probably by tomorrow, and then he'll finish his recording and like that. You had a question too, sir.
You've answered it in part. You seem to me to be a guy. Is your life just one activity after another, or you take breaks, or you just keep going and going and going?
Let's ask my wife that question. You know, as I said, it's not work. There's a great line that I quote on my website, and I say it's great because I wrote it, but it's, a writer looks as if he's always on vacation, because we get to dress like kids, we get to do kid-like things, we get to play, but we're never on vacation because we're working all the time. So yeah, in the course of my day, I'm a big avid beach volleyball player. I have a court at my farm. I play volleyball 3-4 times a week. In the summertime, I ski, I snowboard, I ice skate. So all of those things are sort of, mental illness balancing. But occasionally we'll take a trip. We may get out of the country for a few days, a few weeks this year if we can find the time. But I don't want it to sound as if I'm struggling, because I love what I do. And I know how blessed I am to be able to get up every day. And a woman asked me at a bookstore event over in Chestertown the other day, do you ever get writer's block? I don't know what it is. I've never had writer's block, because I work on several things at the same time, and they're all fascinating to me. And so if I reach a point where I don't know what the next chapter is going to be, I just move over on my desk to a play that I'm working on, or to the new song that I'm writing. And so I kind of grant myself the permission, the freedom to do it. Sometimes, to answer your favorite time of day question, I'll write all night. Karen will wake up and he's gone. But she knows where I am. I'm up on the third floor at my desk. And sometimes I write first thing in the morning. I have a dock on my pond. I call it my outer office. And you'll find me there in the summertime in the afternoon. And I write old school and pencil and spiral notebook. And I'm at my happiest at those times. Any other questions? I know what happens. You leave here and you think, you know what, I should have asked him. So don't be shy. You can ask me anything. If you, all these interviews that I've done, the interviewers would say, can't wait to talk about your book, Ernest, the Book of Maps. We haven't read it, but dying to ask you questions about it. But what was Katharine Hepburn really like? And but I'm accustomed to that. I know because a lot of you have my color hair. You know who Katharine Hepburn was, and you know who a lot of famous people I've worked with are or were. I did an event at the Barnes & Noble in L.A. It's the classy one at the Grove in L.A., and they said, oh, we'd love to have Ernest come and do a book event. Does he know anybody famous? And so the publicist said, do you know anybody famous? And I said, well, I have acted with, written for, and or directed 25 fellow Oscar winners or nominees. Half of them are dead, but does that count? And the woman said, but do you know anybody famous? And fortunately, one of my close buddies is Jean Smart. You know who Jean Smart is? And so she was my sidekick when we did the the bookstore thing at the Barnes and Noble. But so yeah, questions about anybody? Yes, back there. Yeah. I did a thing. Well, the college was closed, but I did a thing with something called Washington College All, which is for people our age. Oh, well, next time. I think they just came back. But this is a great organization they have. They call it Learning at Lunch or something like that. And so I spoke to about 65 people or something. And I looked around and I said to the organizer, I can't help but notice that most of the people here are female. And she said, yes. And she said, a lot of them are not members of the organization. They just signed up. And I said, why do you think that is? And she said, because they saw your picture on the poster. I felt quite flattered. But I'm going back. I'm going back to Chestertown. I'm going to go back and do a workshop there. And I hope to involve, what is your daughter majoring in? Granddaughter. She's interested in writing. Okay. She should know me then. Yeah, well, tell her to be in touch with me. bookofmaps.com, she can find me. Yes, Miss Wentz.
Yes, I just want to say that you were one of the most interesting students that I ever taught. I was a very young teacher at that time, and I think I had you. I didn't realize your mother taught you French, but
It was her fault, yes.
and you were as dramatic as you are today. You were always into something, and especially with Mike Billingsley. And you know, I never forgot you. You just were the most dramatic student I've ever had.
I'd like to think that's a compliment. Martha Rupert noticed that too. Mike and I made up the clever corner. That's what she called us, and she separated us because we were just too clever for our own good. But I told Miss Wentz that in the book, the dad and the son go to Paris, Idaho, and they stop there because, as it says in the books, how can you not stop in Paris, Idaho, and take a picture beneath the Bienvenue sign? And then the father dazzles his son by rattling off, what do you call them, conversations? Was that what they were called in the ALM method? Dialogues. I think they have outlawed ALM, by the way, by now. But we learned, that's how we learned French, first from my mother, and then from Miss Wentz. But neither Mrs. Cole, you taught French first, and I remember going into you, and you said, okay, we're going to start by learning the numbers. And I said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And you said, could you say that slowly? And I said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Because I'd already taken French 1 in 7th grade in New Hampshire. So I thought I was pretty smart. I saw another hand go up. Where was that? Yes. My son, August, is a grad student at NYU. He's written his first novel. He doesn't let me read it, and he doesn't really like my writing. But I'm very proud of him and very excited for what lies ahead. My daughter, Danielle, couldn't be as far removed from creativity if it were possible. She basically runs a Napa, car parts thing out of Atlanta. My other daughter, Heather, she majored in theater at NYU, and she was a musical comedy actress at our small high school in New Hampshire. And when she went to audition at NYU, they said, you belong in Strasbourg. And I don't know if you know what Strasbourg is, but that's method acting. She spent 3 years learning how to be a puddle on the floor. In her last semester, she needed to take a history class. And so she took history of burlesque. and she became a burlesque performer who works under the name Vicky Licorice. Any dads here with daughters? I know one here. She would say, "Hey, Dad, I'm going to be doing a gig in New York. You're going to be in town." I said, "What, November? I'm going to have the flu." "Well, I'm going to be in Boston. That's not too far. Can you come down?" And I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it for the longest time. And I finally went, and she was doing a gig at a bar near Fenway. And so I went, and I watched her like this. And it turned out to be so beautiful and so elegant and so creative that I put her in a movie. And she played my character's daughter, who also happened to be a burlesque performer named Vicky Licorice, to show you how little imagination I have. But she doesn't do that as much anymore just because she's gotten busy with her life. But to answer your question, yeah, those 2 out of 3 are pretty creative. I was the only one in my family. Everybody else has gone into government. Both my brothers worked in the government. My older sister went into business in New York. My baby sister Bettina was a teacher for a while. So I don't know what happened to me. Yes.
I was going to ask, what was it like for you to shift from writing to acting? Did one help the other? Because I don't know how many authors that I know made that transition. And was it helpful? Was it insightful? Was it
Well,
hard?
it was in reverse order for me. So I was in a play that Mr. Eaton directed, and I was just telling my wife yesterday, because we were in that neighborhood, we were all assigned to go to Mrs. Elderdice's house, Mrs. Dorothy's house, to get our costumes, and it was some play in which I had to wear knickers. And so I put on these knickers, and I did not like how baggy they were. And I said, I would like them to be a little smaller. And she said, well, you shouldn't. And so she kept giving me shorter and shorter ones. And then when we appeared on stage at the high school, when I sat down, I realized that my knees were exposed. And I thought, that's all the audience is looking at is my knees. But when I went to college, University of Maryland, and I was dazzling the kids at Westminster High School yesterday saying, when we graduated, anybody who had a C average could go to the University of Maryland. They flunked out half the freshman class, and I had a C average. So I was in. But we also had this little matter of the draft hanging over us. That will teach you to become a good student. I became a very good student. But one night, Steve Sharon, Mike's brother, and I were walking across the campus, and we saw a notice for auditions for Eugene O'Neill's Ah Wilderness. And we thought, let's do it. What? We're a little drunk. We can do this. And so we went. And Steve, he flunked out immediately. But I got called back. And I thought, this is it, man. I got this nailed. And then I didn't get the part. And that irritated me. So I took an acting class to find out what the problem was. And then I was hooked because I was cast in a play right away. I was cast in a theater of absurd play called The Maids by Jean Genet. And I didn't know what the heck I was doing, Miss Wentz. But then I transferred to American U because I found out that children of faculty members at Western Maryland could go free of tuition to American U. So I was in. And then I started getting cast in more plays. And then I was cast, I heard that Cyril Ritchard was coming to Washington to direct a play at Catholic University. And there was a consortium program. So if you were a student at any of the 5 DC colleges, you could take classes at any of the others and get credit. So I called up Catholic and I said, if I take a class, can I audition for the play? And the guy said, I've never heard of it, but I guess so. So I did, and I got cast in the lead, immediately making everyone at Catholic University hate me, and everyone at American University hate me for leaving. But then when I graduated, Cyril asked me if I wanted to go on tour on a play, and that was it. I only started writing for real when I was out of work, because I had starred in a television series, and I starred on Broadway, and then I started another television series, and they all died, and I didn't like being out of work because of my New England work ethic, so I started writing plays because that's what I was familiar with. So what I like to think is that I speak the language so well. I think it's why it's easy for me to direct people who may be, legends, because they know that I know what they know. And I'm able to speak to them in ways that they understand. So I'm not, some automaton coming in and telling them how they're supposed to do it. And to me, it's all different variations of storytelling. Whether I'm writing a song, the only thing I don't do is sing. And that was thank you to Mr. Holmes. Remember Mr. Holmes, 8th grade, HMS Pinafore, the British guy? Yeah, we all had to audition for him, and we all had to sing something. And when it was my turn, he said, "Terribly sorry to tell you, but you can't sing." But I've never stopped writing songs. But when Carly Simon came up to sing my song, The Father-Daughter Dance, she lives on Martha's Vineyard. She came all the way up to New Hampshire. We went to his little studio, and she loved the song. And if you ever listen to it, The Father-Daughter Dance, you'll hear her crying all the way through it because she was so moved because her own dad, Simon of Simon & Schuster, died when she was 15. And driving back, she said, "Ernest, you write such beautiful songs. Why don't you sing them?" And I said, "Mr. Holmes said I can't sing." And she said, "Everybody can sing." I said, "Oh, no, that's not true." And she said, "Sing something." I said, "Oh." I said, "Happy birthday to you." And she said, "Oh, my God, you can't sing." So I do other things. Yeah, another question or two?
Well, we want to do a quick shout out to our friends at Two Sides to the Story podcast who are here today. We have Ted Zaleski and Lori Hairstetter, and Ernest will be on an upcoming episode of
Nice to meet you.
theirs. Ted, did you want to say anything, Lori? I won't make you.
You can hear it on the podcast.
I took a lot of notes from things that you said, so we don't ask you the same questions that
Okay.
you've already heard. And we have lots to talk about. We're really looking forward to it. And I'm a Westminster High School grad as well. Ted, do you have anything?
I'm looking forward to doing it, so we'll find a time sometime, maybe next month, to do it.
Okay.
Very cool.
Well, we will be signing books in the back still. I think we
My
do
neighbor
have
has
some
a quick
additional
question
ones.
she
Oh,
needs to ask.
one last question.
Well, what you're talking about is I have a barn on my property. The barn's 250 years old, and I have theater seats in it. And writers come to my workshop, and I bring in professional actors to read the new plays written by the writers over the course of the weekend. So it's great for them to hear what they've written. So anybody, if you happen to be in New Hampshire, is welcome to come. Just check on our website, and usually it's on a Sunday afternoon that we do the workshops. But I love working with local theaters. I'm doing a new play at a theater outside of Boston in a town called Mansfield, where I used to live when I was a little boy. And I'll go anywhere. I'll go anywhere to work because I love doing it so much. Do you have a theater here in town anymore, Westminster? Yeah. Well, I'm waiting for the invitation, but I'll show up one day. Yeah. Last question. Okay. Good. No, they don't like me, I guess. No, but I'd be happy to have a conversation with them for sure. I'm gonna do more, as I said, over in Chestertown. So why not? I'll be in the neighborhood. That all said, I want to thank, first of all, my wonderful host, Lisa Picker from Carroll County Library. And I want to thank the good folks from A Likely Story bookstore in Sykesville. Jill. Yeah. And I want to thank our host here at Carroll Lutheran Village. I said to them when they asked me if I wanted to do an event here, and I said I probably already know half the prisoners, so why not? And but mostly, I want to thank you. It's so great to see so many of my old friends and acquaintances, and my neighbor, Karen, that's Jimmy Warner's aunt right over there. Jimmy was my good buddy whom we lost too many years ago. Sister. Yeah, that's how close we are. But it's a treat to come back to Westminster, and I really appreciate your coming out today. I appreciate your interest in the book. If you want to take a picture with Oscar, you want me to sign your book more personally, whatever, don't be shy about approaching me. I'm going to be hanging out for a while. And mostly just thanks for coming today.
Yep. Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Ernest. Our sincere thanks and appreciation for sharing your time with us today.
My pleasure.